Mr. Sheldon. Mr. Sheldon. Can you hear me, Mr. Sheldon?
Hello.
Yes, sir. How are we doing this morning?
Good, good. How are you?
I'm very good.
Yes.
You ready?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. I think don't worry about the participants. Majority of the people are joining via social media on LinkedIn and Facebook.
Okay.
Yeah, so don't worry about the participants on actual Zoom.
Okay, cool.
All right. Okay. Then we'll just start in like 2 or 3 minutes at 9 exactly. Good morning, everybody joining from those who are joining us through Zoom on our Facebook pages, on our social media pages on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. Thank you for joining us. And now our governing council chair is joining us, and also our executive director, Madam Maria Nangolo. Thank you for joining. And everybody joining, those from OPM, those from the public sector, thank you for joining us. Today we have a very special guest, Mr. Sheldon Subib. I'll let him introduce himself, but he's a renowned author. You can actually search for him on LinkedIn and you can see all the articles and all the journals that he has written about leadership and human resource practices. But I'll let him introduce himself and I'll let him take it away. Mr. Sheldon, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Katole, for that introduction. So my name is Sheldon Subeb. I sort of run a small consultancy specifically pertaining to management. And I am really interested to see how we can sort of help conversations change, especially with regards to change. I mean, used to sort of the traditional ways of leading, and we have sort of been accustomed to those. But I mean, the times have sort of called us to sort of evolve with in terms of our the way we lead. So I think this conversation is incredibly current and relevant. I see sort of government institution sort of interested in sort of emerging concepts around leadership. Yeah. Mr. Katole, should I then
Yeah,
start
no,
with my
yeah,
presentation?
yeah, continue, please, please. The floor is yours.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're just listening to you. If you have a presentation to share, please.
Okay. My presentation.
Yeah, I think you have hosting rights. The floor is yours.
Come again?
The floor is yours.
Okay. Let me then share my presentation.
Mr. Shavlin, is everything good?
Yes, yes, I'm just sorting out my share.
Okay, okay, there we go.
All right. Yeah, so I think a lot has been said about my presentation today, but I'm really here to just give some of my thoughts and thinking with regards to leading in uncertain times. And like I said before, I think it's a great initiative by NIPAM to sort of start having emerging conversations surrounding leadership. Sort of the table of contents and areas that I want to sort of concentrate on. So a little bit about who we are and to understanding uncertainty and complexity, because these are concepts that people are sort of experiencing and they are felt experiences, but they can't really, you know, sort of pinpoint what they are and when they are sort of in complexity and uncertainty. And I also want to sort of touch on organizational change mindsets. It's important to sort of evaluate what type of thinking is sort of influencing how we make change and leadership decisions, the emotion of any initiative. And then I would like to conclude with some organizing principles around leading in uncertainty. About us, we are Meaning Namibia, a local organizational change consultancy, helping organizations create value, and business direction in a messy, unforgiving, and ever-changing organizational space. Sort of pillars that sort of guide us in the work we do. We like to believe in being extremely people positive, being complexity conscious, in other words, being able to sit in the complexity that is sort of inherent in our world, and then also be future fit in terms of being able to weather any future storm that might come or disruption. Detail, we focus on 3 areas once again: organizational development. We have a sort of model that helps us sort of operate and think about opportunities in the organization where organizational development could sort of contribute to the goal attainment and objectives within an organization. We also look at culture, organizational culture. It's a hot topic in any organization and in any industry, and it is sort of the fuel that helps organizations do what they do. So it also then assists, especially change conversations. One thing that we also like to do is organizational change capabilities, really helping organizations develop change capabilities and skills, especially now where change is inevitable, disruption is inevitable. The ability for organizations to respond appropriately is very important. So with that little self-promotion and motivation, let's get into why we're really here today. The word unprecedented has been on the lips of many leaders in the organization, right? I was also sort of tempted to then put up an alternative list for the word unprecedented, but it really gives us that definition for what is going on out there. We're experiencing times where we really don't know. It's economic unrest, it's global instability, fear in the market, unemployment, is at an all-time high, bailout mania in government, pandemics that are, very scary, and political transitions. And this is all over the world. They are facing problems that are not entirely easy to solve, or the solution is not reducible to a sort of cause and effect. And we will get into why these problems are a little bit different from what we have been used to generally. Then I want to talk about the mystery of leadership, right? A lot of people understand the fundamentals of what leadership is, right? It's really just helping people along, sort of going along, so leading and guiding employees to do what is sort of required for them to do. But I did a sort of Google search, right? And that Google search brought back 24,470,000,000 results. So the central role that leadership plays in any organization is obvious, and it's apparent, and it's well understood in terms of the need for leadership. But there's approaches to leadership that there is no one way to lead an organization, right? And this is an important sort of realization, because it changes as from industry to industry, from organization to organization, ministry to ministry. There will be a different approach required, sort of a contextual leadership, right? And with this understanding, how can we really then say what is leadership and what leadership? A lot of organizations use leadership values to help guide them. But as soon as a disruption happens in the organization or a change requirement, how valid are these leadership values at the end of the day? And so the question is then required, why do we need to sort of reframe and rethink our leadership styles? And this brings me to an acronym that most leaders are very much familiar with, but it was always a sort of over the concept because most organizations didn't feel this sort of volatility, uncertainty, and complex, ambiguous environments. Let's say in the past 10 years, for example, before this pandemic that we're experiencing. But we are currently sitting in a really volatile, uncertain, and complex and ambiguous time in the world. And this sort of framework is very important and very current. And leaders are sort of starting to realize that the value in such a different approach to leadership. So just for clarity, this VUCA was introduced in the mid-90s after the collapse of the socialist system. There was a sudden no need for one specific enemy in the US military, right? So they came up with this VUCA acronym that was going to help them deal with different types of sort of warfare that has started creeping up. So they started experiencing asymmetric warfare, suicide bombing, and cyber warfare. In the past, what war used to be was two countries really fighting one another. And if they have fought before, they know sort of some similar tactics that they've experienced. So there wasn't anything sort of new. But with the introduction of things like suicide, it was a new sort of terrain for leaders and the military. So they had to find an alternative way to look at the problems that they're experiencing. So I'll just go through the acronym just to give clarity. It describes the intensity, so volatility describes the intensity of fluctuation over time. So the environment requires you to act quickly to your control. Then we have uncertainty. It describes the unpredictability of events. The more surprises the context provides, the more uncertain it is. The environment requires to take an action without certainty. So you don't know, you don't have enough information to sort of decide or act. And it really can create some form of frustration for leaders, especially if they don't know what is out there. And then we have complex, which is influenced by the number of influencing factors. So the environment is incredibly dynamic with many interdependencies with the potential to cause chaos or confusion. And then we have ambiguous. It manifests in a lack of clarity and difficulty of understanding exactly what the situation is. And the environment is unfamiliar outside of individual expertise. So an expert cannot give you a solution. It is very vague to one individual. I wanted to focus on two of these areas. One is uncertainty and complexity, because I think volatility and ambiguity are much more understandable, but with uncertainty and complexity, I think there is a sort of deep understanding required for it, for people to sort of get that the difference between those. So let's look at complexity first. So complexity is sort of defined as a complex system and is characterized by having many different parts that are highly interconnected and interdependent. The evolution of complexity involves the process of differentiation, meaning the system comes to more parts, with those parts being more specialized in integration and integrated. So meaning the parts become more interconnected and interdependent. A complex is two parts dynamically to function as a whole, and the parts are interconnected, and each part is composed of subsystems nested within a larger one. Now, I know there's a lot of jargon and sort of technical terms, but they are typically characterized by a number of interconnections or interdependency within an element, local rules that apply to each element, responses from these elements, adaptiveness so that the system adjusts to guarantee continued operation. There is self-organizing within that system, which new settings in the system take over spontaneously. Progression in complexity so that the system sometimes becomes larger and more sophisticated over time. Like I said, this is really complex technical understanding for this is not what a sort of presentation like this is going to help. One would need to sort of go in more detail. But I thought I would use an example to sort of clarify this in much more detail. So in our world, we have what is called a simple system. In this domain, there is easy cause and effect relationships that are predictable and repeatable. They are evident to any reasonable person. It is a system that is obvious. Has specific constraints that help guide decision making. And for example, you would have a handbook or a checklist that will help you sort of get to a solution easier. Now, a perfect example is a bicycle, right? If a bicycle breaks down, if you haven't experienced a bicycle before, you will use the handbook that has come with the bicycle, or you'll be able to quickly find where in the system of the bicycle is the problem. So is it the chain that has fallen off? Is it the tire that has burst? Is it the wheel that is not sort of turning, or is my chair not seated correctly? You'll be able to quickly look at the bicycle, sense what is wrong, categorize the problems in terms of, yes, this is right, this isn't right, and then respond appropriately. So if the chain was the issue, you'd be the chain back on, and the system would then work. So these are sort of simple systems. And in your organization, you'll be able to pick these type of systems very easily, right? You find them in a lot of automated type of work where things are straightforward and you don't need to sort of check or analyze these type of things. So a specific checklist would look at all of the areas that needed to be done. So because it's a simple task and the task needs to be done, basically. And then we have what is called complicated system. And it is really a problem that requires many steps to be followed in a logical and linear fashion. In the complicated domain, the cause and effect relationship still exists, but they are no self-evident, they're not self-evident rather, and so there is a thorough sort of root cause analysis approach required to find a problem and or solution. So for example, fixing an airplane or an aircraft is a complicated problem because you would need an expert well versed in the specific parts of an airplane to actually, sort of fix it. So the engineer will do analysis of what the problem is and, find out what is known and what is unknown in terms of where the problem may come from, and then use that information to sort of decide, oh, maybe the engine is the problem, or the wing, or the tire is the problem, right? So, and at the end of the day, they will then decide to then pick up or take out that specific part and fix the airplane. The part of the airplane, all the rest of the plane is sort of intact. Fix that one, put it back, and check whether the airplane sort of works. And you can sort of, and that removing of that part and fixing it and putting it back is sort of an important character of complicated systems because as you will see in my next slide, you find problems where that is sort of not possible. And then we have complex problems, and complex problems are problems that government particularly are experiencing, right? Case in point, poverty. Poverty is a problem which there is no linear and logical solution. You cannot pinpoint that the reason why we have a high level of poverty in our country, right? And because there are so many interrelated connections to poverty that we cannot reduce it to a single cause and effect. So these kind of problems are, they are messy, they are open-ended, they are ill-defined. In many cases, it's hard to say what the right question is, let alone sort of. And a country, for example, has the sort of largest, in my opinion, scale of complexity because they are working with a whole nation and varying needs and, and in those varying needs, being able to sort of give people a solution is incredibly difficult. Let's look at this slide a little bit more in detail. So, there are some contributing factors that I sort of picked up that may contribute to poverty. So you have urbanization, you have the economy, you have population, you have education, you have government revenue, you have the psychological stability of everyone in the country, you have the political situation, and you have inequalities. And this is just what I sort of picked up. But if you put 100 people in the room from different diverse backgrounds and experiences, a much bigger picture than what I have put up here. And the problem with this is that each of these areas that are contributing to this sort of poverty line within a country are on their own complex in and of themselves, right? So urbanization is a problem that the government can face. The economy and creating a prosperous one at that is one organizations, a country, how fast the population or slow the population is growing can contribute. Education in terms of the quality of education and ensuring that there is access to education is a complex problem on its own. Government revenue is an obvious. The political situation and inequalities. And the reality is urbanization can impact, population can impact government revenue. Political situation can impact the economy. So I don't know, what I'm trying to drive through with this is that trying to solve for complex problems require one to understand the amount of complexity you are actually dealing with. It's not a straightforward, we are going to do this and hopefully sort of poverty will sort of reduce, right? And in that understanding, you then start realizing that we cannot only focus on one thing, for example, giving grants or providing SME development opportunities. It needs to be a multiple approach, in terms of solving those kind of problems to see where we are sort of having much more success. One area or one solution, we may only realize 10, 15 years down the line that this was not actually contributing to the betterment, rather it was contributing to a sort of continuous process of the problem that we are sort of trying to solve at the end of the day. And it is in this realization or the difference between complicated problems and I just put together some examples that would sort of drive this a little bit more into the listeners today. So for example, you can have a wedding. A wedding in and of itself is complicated. There are things that are sort of obvious that you will be able to sort of do and checklist, but having a happy marriage is complex. Fixing a car is complicated. There are parts within a car that are fixable for the system of a car to work, but disrupting the automotive industry nationally, subnationally, or internationally is a complex endeavor. Doing a math assignment, complicated. There are set rules that you need to follow in terms of solving that problem. But doing a writing assignment, that is a little bit more complex. Implementing customer relationship management system, complicated because once again, there are set rules that sort of helps the technical side of the project become a reality. But we experience constantly is complex. There are sort of moving needs and wants from our customers that we can 100% not foresee and be able to solve for automatically. Rolling out an idea management software, once again, complicated. Creating and executing on a robust innovation agenda in an organization, complex. Demarcating pieces of land, surveying pieces of land, complicated. There are and things that need to be considered. But a multi-stakeholder land use planning is complex because there are, once again, moving needs and wants that people need to sort of consider. Investigating a rape case, complicated. Finding whose version of the situation is true. But reducing gender-based violence is a complex endeavor. And the list goes on, really, right? You start seeing of differentiating in terms of the types of problems you experience. You are able to sort of start seeing them, in your workplace, in your house, in your country, that really this is not an easy task, right? And for me, government is always a place where they are facing real challenges, and the problems are not complicated, it's complex. And I always have sort of sympathy for them because it's not an easy task. So why this thinking for complex? It's about responding appropriately, right? If we are not comfortable with dropping the tools that we are used to, especially in times of uncertainty and times of complexity, we will be doing things and not really having an impact. And that concept, understanding of one size fits all, does not become a reality, right? So the idea here is to really have a thorough understanding of what a technical problem is, which is complicated, an adaptive challenge where people need to sort of adapt their thinking constantly. And it is in that constant adaptation in the way and approaches that we sort of lead and change that a reality. And then we have a very great tool by a Welsh professor called Dave Snowden, who helps us sort of put our problems into perspective, right? So we have what is called a simple problem, where best practice is applicable. And in that domain or system, you can merely just categorize the problem in terms of where in the system the problem may be coming from, and then respond appropriately. So the bicycle would be find the problem on the bicycle, and then sort of categorize the specific areas, and then fix the problem, so respond. In complicated, on the other hand, you have to sense, and there is a deep analyzing part is important, you know. And when you've done a thorough analysis and report, you can sort of respond to what you have analyzed, and this really just requires good enough practices, right? So best practice is not necessarily one that you would apply here, because there are some form of variability in a complicated system, right? One we've just spoken about, you need to probe the system, you need to go into the system and really, you know, ask questions. And when you ask and look into to the organization through your people or through your stakeholders, you are able to get a sense of where you might be headed to in terms of a specific problem you may be experiencing in your organization. And then you respond. And this area is really, there are no rules that you can apply, there are no things that you can put in place. It's something that sort of, as information comes to the front, you are able to sort of then decide. And it is in that deliberate information searching that you sort of create that sort of certainty and sort of help unentangle the complexity that you are experiencing. And then chaotic one, because with a chaotic one, it is really an obvious situation. If a country were to be bombed, you can only act, sense, and respond. And out of that, you learn new ways of dealing with a sort of chaotic experience. Yeah. So the one thing that is important here is to understand that we are not dealing with straightforward linear type problems. And especially in government, you face problems that you cannot easily reduce to a single cause and effect. And sort of understanding that difference becomes a sort of deciding factor when you evaluate the impact that your initiative has sort of created. And then I want to look at uncertainty. Now, it's also a difficult one, but it's also obvious at the same time, because with uncertainty, it is really a felt experience. You know, there's a feeling of anxiousness, there's a feeling of helplessness that comes with uncertainty, because it's really about it being associated with the inability to understand what is happening. You know, uncertain environments are those that do not allow for make any predictions. You cannot say that COVID is going to be over in 2 months. There is so much uncertainty surrounding a problem or a challenge that you cannot reduce it to a sort of cause and effect. So the more uncertain the world is, the harder it is to predict the future. And that future state that we are so used to being certain of has become a challenge for not only government, but you know, every and doing a cost-benefit analysis, especially for public policies, cannot be undertaken under the assumption of uncertainty. You know, as policy benefits and costs concern the present as well as the future, and usually this future is uncertain. So uncertainty then can be defined as an individual perceived inability to predict something accurately. And I found this sort of change mindset methodology that helps us look at uncertainty a little bit more in detail, right? So in organizations, you usually have 3 areas or 3 mindsets for change, right? You have one that is pre-stable, pre-stable, stable, and post-stable. So a pre-stable organizational change mindset is usually similar to a startup. They are characterized by a lack of non-compliance to policies, procedures, or structures. The organization, mission, vision is constantly shifting, and there's a general inconsistency to culture, leadership, and the business model. Yeah, and the business model is apparent. So the role of leadership in these kinds of organization is to create stability. You know, so it's sort of a chaotic experience. So so you need to sort of create stability through finding creative ways to solve problems within the organization. And sort of the type of leadership that this sort of mindset invokes is usually entrepreneurial, right? So as an entrepreneur, you are, you know, tasked to look for creative ways to solve existing problems within the organization. If even any startup who comes up with a new brilliant idea is really trying to solve in a creative way the problems that he has sort of identified, he or she. And in that process of finding a solution and creating ways of working that sort of stabilizes the organization, you then move into that stable mindset, right? Stable organizational change mindset, which is characterized by predictability, efficiency, control and command, and maintaining that status quo. These organizations are well defined and processes with prescribed shared vision, mission, and strategic plan. And the role of leadership in this organization is characterized by the total oversight of organizational conformance, performance, and they are usually risk averse, right? And they are really, really focused on making sure that the work is done in a correct way. And this leadership or mindset is usually considered to be administrative. They administer the process consistently. And then you have what is called a post-stable organization. Now, when disruption happens, and you are in a stable mindset, it catches one off guard because you now need to sort of scramble for what the and that could be seen with these new hybrid organizations that now are sort of becoming a new way of life where people are no longer sort of forced to be in a building and sort of physically be seen doing the work. And these post-stable organizations are usually characterized by staying ahead of trends, by operating quickly and proactively. The board's role here is to create a culture of open discussion, constructive challenge, and constant mindfulness about our environment. And there's a strong focus on resiliency and adaptability, and develops this kind of organizations responsiveness to disruptive situations. And the kind of leadership in this organization is usually an enabling one. Enabling in the sense that we are not supposed to just be a stable organization. Instead, we deliberately try to create an organization that is constantly changing, and there is a sort of balance between this pre-stable area where people are allowed, enabled to challenge things, and then obviously creating that stability and enforcing these new ways of thinking and into the organization. And that sort of balance is usually the problem within organization, because with governance, you want to make sure that we are ticking all of the boxes in terms of following procedure and making sure that we are on the right side of being on the right side of the books may perpetuate a stability that should disruption happen, may sort of put an organization back. And you always find this tug of war between trying to change in an organization and this stable requirement. We need to make sure that we are following the rule. It really is about opening up the organization for experimentation, for change, for being able to do things outside of what is our usual boundary as an organization. And instead of looking at organization as a stable, sort of stable organization, you try ideas with new ways of thinking, and it can only be done when people are really empowered. And we are not talking this half empowerment. Yes, you can think about it or give me a proposal. People are actually allowed to then experiment with, if it's with a new product or a new service or a new department. Only when we have those kind of failure and the scars from those can we say that, okay, this is maybe not the best approach, but how then can we improve this new way of thinking? Once again, I want to just use a critical or an example that is very relevant. We have two new kids on the block in government, the NIPDB and NAMRA, you know. And if you look at these two organizations, for me, as I see it, they're actually complex problems, right? For NIPDA to promote and facilitate investment by foreign and Namibian investors and new ventures that contribute to economic development and job creation. So facilitating investment by foreign and Namibian investors, and to develop the economy and create job creation. There are so many contributing factors to economic development, so many contributing factors to job creation, so many contributing factors, moving contributing factors to investing, to ensuring that our country is investment friendly, right? And with NAMRA, it's the same. It's, you know, assess and collect taxes and duties on behalf of government, and essentially create voluntary. It's not an easy debt collection exercise. We are talking about hundreds of thousands of people who need to willingly donate, not donate, but pay their taxes to government. And you cannot really police all of those people. How then do you have an approach where you find a solution to a problem as complex as that one, right? And with the establishment of these organizations, government has realized that investment and revenue for government are complex problems, and we need different ways of thinking. So we need to reframe essentially our approach as it pertains to these specific areas of government. Now, let's take those two companies and apply this sort of organizational change mindset, right? So the entrepreneurial stage, right? So they have just set up shop and they're trying to find that solution in terms of how do we get investment and how do we ensure that our country is economically viable and we are creating jobs for the nation. So in that process, right, there will be trial and error. Both focused on conforming to good governance and compliance. Obviously, there are specific things that are not negotiable, but there's not entirely that focus. Right now, the focus is at trying to solve that complex problems. I mean, the complex problems that I just mentioned, right? And when they find that solution, or a solution that they think they are willing to go with, they will operationalize it. And here then kicks in the administrative leadership to put this into the organization and whoever needs to sort of be involved in this solution. Now, this process is usually a stabilizing one, in that you create a form of stability because you have found a solution that is working. The problem with being in a stable or creating stability in an organization is that, yes, you may be creating stability in your organization, but externally, the forces are not going to follow. In the investment or the economy in the world is not going to sort of follow the stability, and as a result, you may be creating stability, but outside of your organization, that's the economy moves on, joblessness continues, or new contributing factors to joblessness continue. So disruption happens, right? And the reality is organizations need to sort of move to this post-stable mindset where there's a constant change, constant mindfulness of what is going on outside of our organization and how can we adapt, how can we move with the times. So at the end of the day, you don't get sort of get caught up with a disruption and you are sort of outside of this disruption. Um, so how do you then lead in times of complexity and uncertainty, because it is difficult to really, pinpoint what needs to be done, and especially the how, right? And how do we create an enabling environment for change to happen? How do we stable or having a stable mindset in an organization to a more post-stable, enabling and adaptive organization? So I have come up with sort of 4 areas that organizations can consider using or thinking about when leading in tough times. So the first one is contextual leadership and leadership development. Second one is being comfortable with complexity and its impact on change, creating adaptive spaces, and then diversity and empowerment. So I'll just quickly go through each and every one of them, just so it sort of creates a solid understanding. So contextual leadership development implies both a capability to discern trends in the face of complexity and uncertainty, as well as adaptability while still trying to shape the current. It has to adjust their style to the situation and to their followers' needs. It requires them to create a system for the flow of information that educates their hunches. Now, a few weeks ago, I read an article in the newspaper talking about consistent leadership and being consistent as a leader. Being consistent is an important trait that leaders need to have. In a stable environment, right? So when we're in a stable organization, being consistent as a leader is fine. But the moment disruption happens or change is required, obviously you cannot use the same skills or the same leadership approach for in times of difficulty or disruption. So leading instability and leading in instability or requires a change in thinking, and it is important for leaders to sort of understand that, and that is why it is important to lead contextually. What is going on in my organization, contextually, and that is how then you sort of learn to sort of adjust your leadership approach in the context where you are currently working. So the ability to understand the environment and to capitalize on those evolving trends is also another important factor. So when you are contextual as a leader, knowing or being able to sort of sense what is going on in your organization, picking up what is called weak signals, signals that are not entirely telling you, screaming at you that this is what needs to happen, that you can pick up those sort of minute changes within employees, within our market, within our customers, within our people and be able to respond appropriately. Yeah, so contextual leadership is something that organizations can look at and how to sort of develop that ability to pick up things within our organization. Then we have what is called an adaptive space. So we can define adaptation as the capacity for a system to change its state in response to some changes within its environment. An adaptive system is then a system that can change some external uneasiness, and this is done in order to optimize or maintain its conditions within an environment by modifying themselves, right? So that was adaptation. Now, what is then an adaptive space? It is the process by which ideas emerge and flow in the organization, as well as the freedom for ideas to flow into and throughout an organization. In a stable organization where sort of everything performance is acceptable, there is no need for adaptation, right? And there will be no need for an adaptive space. But having an adaptive space, being able to say, this is what is sort of coming out as an organization, I mean, as a market or as an industry or as a sector or as a ministry, we can only do those type of picking up of innovation or changes through deliberate conversations about where are we now, how can we move to the future, and not done to sort of complete a governance check by making sure that we are doing correct planning, but it is a constant conversation within the organization to say where can we implement something different that could help the overall, as opposed to setting goals at the beginning of the year and trying to follow those goals, mercilessly. And it really involves opening up connections for people, ideas, information, and resources to come together and interact in ways that enhances adaptability and agility. And then we have the complexity. And I think if COVID has taught us anything, it is that complexity is uncomfortable, uncertainty is uncomfortable. There is a sort of uneasiness that comes with sitting in these at this level of complexity and thinking. And it is really about just playing in that pressure. Once we have set up the adaptive space that we spoke about just now, how to sit in this uncertainty and really question it, really be able to sort of sit in the mess. Because what usually happens is a lot of leaders either fight or flight when it comes to uncertainty and complexity, and revert back to maintaining a sort of stable organization, as opposed to going into complexity and going into the uncertainty and really questioning the uncertainty by understanding, okay, so how uncertain are we about this specific area? Is it like 5 years down the line, or is it a 3 to 4 months time period of uncertainty? And this can only be done if you are really comfortable with sitting in sort of complex, uncertain, messy, open-ended type of problems. It's either a quick decision,
Mr. Sheldon, we seem to have lost Mr. Sheldon. Nevertheless, let us see if we can get him back, or we'll take any questions. All right, guys, I just spoke to Mr. Sheldon. He just had some technical difficulties, so we're just waiting for him to join again. Just give us 2 minutes. Thank you. All right, Mr. Sheldon is back.
Yes, the joys of technology. So luckily, I think we're almost close to the end of my presentation. Yeah, so I was saying, yes, diversity and empowerment is also another aspect of component that organizations need to sort of look at, right? So being the diversity and empowerment is area in which organization, especially in Namibia, where it is really a focus, obviously because of legislation, but usually the experience within organizations is that leaders are the ones that sort of set the tone for change, because they have what is called, just a minute. Apologies for that. So yeah, diversity and empowerment is another important aspect if you want to lead in uncertain times, because no longer are leaders going to sort of focus on being the hero and being the one that sort of solves the problem, because a single perspective, especially in uncertain and complex problems, may be a limiting way to solve problems. So you would then require the entire organization to sort of contribute to solving this problem. So there is a systemic and collective approach to leading, where making sure that everybody's voice in the organization is sort of heard for them to be able to contribute to change. Because yes, they are change owners and they are sort of the leaders that set the mood and the direction for change, but the actual implementation requires an enablement for everyone to sort of play in that, to have a sort of stake in the change. And this can only be done if we have real diversity within challenging and complex problems, and subsequently empowering every single employee and at times even external stakeholders to sort of contribute to solving these kind of problems. Yeah, so once again, just to summarize, it's important for leaders to be contextual in their endeavors for leading in uncertain times. Understand your organization, be able to pick sort of changes and nuances that are happening with your people, your stakeholders, your industry mates, technology, etc. So there needs to really be an ear on the ground as it pertains to the organization as a system, and the boundaries within the organization, the boundaries within where the organization sort of operates. Being comfortable with complexity. Complexity is going to come to organizations, government, ministries, agencies from all directions. We need to get absolutely comfortable with it, and it's that new normal that we need to just accept fully and embrace. And I think once we've sort of embraced that complexity, we are sort of have a different mindset in the way we approach the problem. Adaptive space, being deliberate really in creating those open pockets within the organizations to change. And it really is about dropping the tools that we are used to using, especially when making decisions, and allowing for a conversation as opposed to a individual sort of perspective and solution. And then we have obviously diversity and empowerment. Without the multiple perspectives with complex problems and in uncertainty, we will only have one sort of view and perspective. So making sure that the people in the room, when we are dealing with complex and uncertain situations, there are people from different backgrounds and levels of the organization that can sort of speak to the problem. And this is usually really done by fully empowering people to sort of come as they are to the organization and let them sort of solve problems as well. And then final words, we have a very good CEO of MTN, in my opinion, Mr. Ralph Mupita, who really, sums up this kind of thinking for me. And he says, today is not so much about the skills accumulation. It's not really about the skills that we pick up, the certification, etc. It's about the capacity to learn and unlearn. what are things right now that we need to unlearn as an organization, as a ministry, as a government agency, that will help us sort of create the change and certainty and uncomplex environment that we need to sort of help us get where we need to get. And then obviously Winston Churchill also says, don't waste a good crisis to learn something new. So a crisis or a complex problem or uncertainty is really about learning. It's learning about operating in different areas or different ways, and it really is an opportunity to pick up new skills and drop the skills that we are, or the tools that we are so used to. Yeah, and that is me.
All right, Mr. Sheldon, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I think that was very informative. Especially that you keep mentioning, you know, how public institutions can improve, and you keep referencing to public institutions, and these are actually our main clientele. So I really thank you, Mr. Sheldon. I don't see any questions on our Facebook or LinkedIn or any of our social media pages.
Okay.
But if questions do arise, I think I'll send them to you.
Okay.
And then you can maybe answer them and revert back to me.
Yes.
Okay, but thank you. I think NIPAM will definitely be in touch with you regarding this training. I actually got a call from, while you're busy, from our executive director, saying this is exactly what she's been emphasizing on management to do.
Yeah.
So I think it was very informative.
All right. I'm glad that there was some value in my sort of meandering conversation.
I know there's a lot of value. There's really a lot of value. I think we use some of these webinars even in our trainings, just to give participants a different perspective. But it was very informative. So.
All right. Great. Thank you very much. I think yeah, I think it's really a great opportunity to speak to people outside of my sort of close area, and I think a lot of what we learn is not really about the sort of direct ways of learning. It really is this unforced way of looking at things differently.
Correct. But thank you, sir. NIPAM will definitely be in touch with you in the future.
All right. Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in for our webinar. It was a very informative webinar on leadership in uncertain times. We dealt with the VUCA perspective, and then also it's the complex issues around leadership and how you can overcome these. All right, this webinar will be available for the next 2 weeks on our social media pages. It will be available on LinkedIn and as well as Facebook, so you can always go back and view it and so on. But again, thank you for everybody for tuning in, and we thank Mr. Sheldon again for giving us this very informative presentation. Right, until next time.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.